It was a little after 9 when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wiped my hands on a towel, thinking it was just another work email. But when I looked at the screen, my heart skipped a beat. It was a text from Megan, my daughter's babysitter. Who's the man standing in the hallway? For a second, I just stared at it, confused. I was at the office, and no one else was supposed to be home. My daughter, Lila, was upstairs in her room. Megan was babysitting her for the night while I worked late. I typed back quickly, "What man? You're joking, right?" Her response came almost immediately. "I'm serious, Emma. There's someone here. He's standing right outside Lila's room." My chest tightened. I felt my whole body go cold. I opened the baby monitor app on my phone, my hands shaking. The feed loaded for a few seconds, glitching with static before clearing. And then I saw it. Lila sitting cross-legged on the floor, brushing her doll's hair. Behind her, near the bedroom doorway, a tall shadow stood perfectly still. It wasn't Megan. It wasn't me. It was someone else. Stay with me until the end, because what I found that night still makes it hard for me to close my eyes in my own home. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. It helps more people hear stories that remind us why we should always trust our instincts. My name is Emma Clark, and I live in a small 2-bedroom house just outside Portland with my 4-year-old daughter, Lila. It's a quiet neighborhood where people still wave when they pass each other on morning walks, and kids play in their front yards until sunset. I work from home as a marketing manager, balancing deadlines with bedtime stories. My life is simple, steady, and centered around keeping Lila safe and happy. After my divorce 2 years ago, I built this new life from scratch. Just us two. It wasn't always easy, but for the first time in years, I finally felt like we were safe. That night felt like any other Friday. Lila begged to stay up late to watch her favorite cartoon, and I finally said yes since I had to attend a late client meeting from home. I called Megan Reed, our regular babysitter. She's 19, smart, responsible, and someone Lila absolutely adores. She's been with us for months, and I trusted her completely. Before I went downstairs to my office, I checked on Lila. She was sitting on her bed surrounded by dolls, her soft brown curls falling into her eyes as she smiled at me. "Mommy, can you tell Megan to let me have ice cream later?" she asked. I laughed. "Only if you brush your teeth after." It was the kind of small moment that makes parenthood worth it. I kissed her forehead, turned on the baby monitor, and went downstairs. An hour later, I was buried in my presentation slides when the first text came through. "Who's the man standing in the hallway?" At first, I thought Megan was trying to scare me. She loved true crime stories and once joked about how she'd be a terrible horror movie character because she'd go investigate every weird sound. So, I sent back a short reply. "Very funny, Meg." A few seconds later, my phone buzzed again. This time, there was a photo attached. It was a still frame from the baby monitor feed. My daughter's room looked dim, the pink nightlight glowing softly in the corner. Lila was there, perfectly still, sitting on the floor. But in the doorway behind her, half in shadow, was a tall figure. No details, no face, just a dark outline, like a person standing completely motionless. That's when my stomach dropped. I called Megan immediately. She answered, her voice trembling. "Emma, he was just standing there. He looked right at the camera, and then he moved." My breath caught in my throat. "Take Lila and go into the bathroom. Lock the door, now." I didn't wait for her to reply. I grabbed my car keys, ran to the driveway, and dialed 911 as I started the engine. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. The dispatcher stayed on the line as I sped through the empty streets, headlights slicing through the dark. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see Megan's silhouette in the upstairs window holding Lila. The porch light flickered as I jumped out of the car. Police sirens were already approaching. The front door was wide open. The night air inside the house felt strange, cold, heavy, like someone had been standing there just moments ago. The officers searched every room, their flashlights cutting across the walls, but they found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No one inside. Megan was still shaking when I reached her. She clutched Lila in her arms and whispered, "I swear, he was real. He was right there." I believed her, because what I saw on that camera feed wasn't a trick of the light. It was a person. And somewhere in that house, someone had been watching my daughter. The police stayed for almost an hour that night, combing through every room while I stood clutching Lila in the living room. They checked the doors, windows, and the backyard, but nothing looked disturbed except for the faint smudge of a muddy footprint near the back door. It wasn't big, just a single mark on the tile that didn't match my shoes, Megan's, or Lila's. One of the officers made a note of it, then gave me the same line they always give, probably just a delivery driver or a kid cutting through the yard. But Megan couldn't stop shaking. Her eyes were wide, her face pale. "No," she said quietly. "He was inside. I saw him standing there, Emma. He looked straight at the camera. After they left, I locked every door, every window, and pushed a chair under the handle of the back door just in case." Megan stayed the night because I couldn't calm down enough to be alone. Lila was asleep on the couch, wrapped up in her blanket, completely unaware of how close we had come to danger. When the house finally went quiet, I replayed the baby monitor footage again and again. The image was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. A shape, tall and motionless, right behind my daughter. I paused the screen and zoomed in. It almost looked like a man in a dark hoodie, but his face, if that's what it was, seemed blurred, like the camera refused to focus on it. The recording glitched right after he moved. The screen flickered to static for 5 seconds, and then returned to normal, showing an empty doorway. That kind of interference shouldn't happen. The monitor was brand new. The next morning, I dropped Lila at my sister's house before work. Megan begged me not to stay home alone, but I had to. I needed to understand how this happened. I started with the security system. I checked the logs for the back door and windows. Nothing. No motion alerts, no tripped sensors. It was as if whoever came in knew exactly how to avoid detection. That thought chilled me. When I got home that evening, the house felt different, quieter, heavier. I went through the rooms one by one, searching for anything out of place. Then, near the hallway where Megan said she saw him, I noticed something small tucked behind the bookshelf. A coin, old and dirty, with a faint red rust stain across it. It wasn't ours. I held it up, feeling my stomach tighten. Someone had been there. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Megan texted to check in. "You okay?" "Trying to be," I replied. "Emma, what if he comes back?" Her message made my throat tighten. I didn't want to admit it, but that fear had already taken root. So I made a plan. I bought 2 new security cameras and installed one outside the back door and one facing Lila's room. I kept the baby monitor app open on my phone while I worked, watching every movement in real time. For a few days, everything was normal. Lila played, laughed, and danced around the living room like nothing had happened. Megan came back to babysit again, though I could see she was still nervous. We tried to act like life had gone back to normal, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Then, on the 4th night, it happened again. I was tucking Lila into bed when I heard a soft creak from the hallway. I froze. The sound was faint but distinct, like the weight of a foot pressing on an old floorboard. I stepped out of Lila's room, scanning the dark hallway, and called out softly, "Megan?" No answer. I checked every room. Nothing. The air felt still, but the hair on my arms stood on end. I walked back toward Lila's door and noticed something that made my blood run cold. The baby monitor camera, the one I had mounted high on the wall, was now tilted slightly downward. It had been moved. I picked it up and checked the live feed on my phone. The view was crooked, showing only half the room. I adjusted it back and hit record. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Later that night, while reviewing the footage, I noticed a shadow move across the bottom corner of the screen. It was fast, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a quick, dark blur passing between the doorway and the closet. I replayed it 10 times, frame by frame. It wasn't a trick of the light. I ran upstairs and opened the closet, empty, just toys, clothes, and a few boxes. But as I turned to leave, I heard it, the faintest tapping sound coming from behind the wall. Tap, pause, tap. I pressed my ear to the drywall. The sound was real, rhythmic. It was coming from inside the wall behind the closet. Every instinct in me screamed to get out, but I couldn't move. Then Lila's voice broke through the silence. "Mommy, who's talking in the wall?" I grabbed her, ran downstairs, and locked us both in the living room. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely speak. I called 911 again, but by the time the police arrived, the noise had stopped. They checked everything, the walls, the crawl space, the attic, but found nothing. The officer's voice was calm but firm. "It could be pipes or an animal, ma'am. You should get someone to check it out in daylight." But I knew better. The pipes didn't move cameras. The pipes didn't stand in doorways. That night, as I lay awake on the couch with Lila sleeping beside me, I caught myself staring at the ceiling, listening. The house was silent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been there before never really left. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling through the blinds, but my chest still felt tight. The night before had replayed in my mind over and over. The shadow, the camera moving, the tapping behind the wall. I couldn't let it go. I called into work and decided to stay home. I needed answers. This wasn't just fear anymore. It was something deeper, something gnawing at me. I had to find out what was really happening inside my own house. After dropping Lila at my sister's, I came back armed with coffee, gloves, and determination. I started where the tapping had come from, the wall behind Lila's closet. I emptied the clothes and boxes, pushing everything aside until only the bare drywall was visible. I pressed my ear against it again. Silence. I tapped lightly with my knuckles. It sounded hollow, too hollow. I grabbed a flashlight and went around to the hallway, studying the floorboards, the walls, the way the air vent was positioned. Something didn't add up. The space between Lila's room and the hallway seemed wider than it should have been. I measured it with a small tape measure I found in the toolbox. There was an extra 2 feet of space unaccounted for. There was something behind that wall. At first, I thought it was just bad construction or an old storage area I didn't know about. But then I remembered. The police had said the back door's lock was broken from the inside. Whoever had been there knew the house well, maybe even better than I did. I drove to the hardware store and bought a small inspection camera, the kind plumbers use to look through tight spaces. When I got home, I drilled a small hole behind the closet's baseboard and fed the camera cable through. The moment the screen lit up, my blood ran cold. The image showed a narrow gap, a hidden crawl space no more than 3 feet wide. Dust hung in the air like fog, and in the corner of the feed, half covered by insulation, I saw it, a blanket, a water bottle, and a pair of men's shoes. My hands went numb. Someone had been living there. I yanked the camera out and backed away, my breathing heavy. I wanted to call the police right away, but then something stopped me. What if he was still here? What if calling made him panic, and he came out? I decided to check every inch of that house before doing anything else. I went room by room, checking under beds, inside cabinets, even behind furniture. Nothing. But the house felt off, like the air itself was too thick to breathe. When I reached the basement door, I hesitated. It was always locked, mostly because I hated how damp and dark it was. I'd hardly gone down there since we moved in. The lock was unlatched. I gripped the handle and slowly pulled it open. A wave of cold air hit me. The single bulb above the stairs flickered weakly. I stepped down, one careful foot at a time. The wooden steps creaked. The smell of earth and mold filled my nose. When I reached the bottom, I froze. The basement looked normal at first. Storage boxes, tools, a washer and dryer. But in the far corner, near the foundation wall, was something I hadn't seen before. A panel of plywood, roughly nailed over an opening. There were faint scratch marks along its edge. My heart pounded in my ears. I knelt down, pulled at the edges, and the panel came loose with a sharp crack. Behind it was a small tunnel, maybe 4 feet tall, carved between the wall studs. My flashlight beam revealed more than I was ready to see. A sleeping bag, a stack of canned food, a plastic flashlight, and a set of photographs. They were pictures of Lila. Some were recent, her playing in the yard, riding her bike, sitting by the window drawing. Others were older, printed ones from last year's preschool folder. I had no idea how he'd gotten them. My knees gave out, and I dropped the flashlight. The beam spun wildly, scattering light across the concrete floor. That's when I heard it, a sound from above, footsteps, slow, careful, coming from the hallway. He was still here. I ran up the stairs, heart slamming in my chest. As soon as I reached the top, I slammed the basement door shut and jammed a chair under the handle. My hands fumbled for my phone. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house, I said, barely able to get the words out. Please, send someone now. The operator's calm voice tried to keep me steady, but every second felt endless. I backed into the living room, gripping a kitchen knife, eyes locked on the hallway. The floor creaked again, closer this time. Ma'am, are you in a safe place? No, I whispered. He's inside. The sound stopped. The house went quiet except for my breathing. Then, from down the hall, I heard something else. A door closing, not loudly, softly, almost careful. It was Lila's bedroom door. My stomach twisted. That was the same room where the figure had first appeared. Within minutes, sirens echoed in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed through the front window as officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. They swept the house from top to bottom. I stayed on the porch, shaking, barely able to hold myself up. When they came back, the lead officer's expression said it all. There's no one here. I wanted to scream. I told them about the crawl space, the basement tunnel, the photographs. They went back down, then returned 10 minutes later, holding the pictures carefully in a plastic bag. You were right, the officer said. Someone's been living under your house. That sentence hit me harder than anything else could. All those nights I thought I was safe. All those times I'd tucked my daughter in. Someone had been only a few feet away, listening, watching, waiting. And I realized then that this wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about survival. And I wasn't about to let him have control of our home again. The police searched my house for hours that night, combing through the basement, the crawl space, and every inch of the walls. They found the hidden area just like I described, a narrow section between Lila's bedroom and the hallway, built from leftover framing wood and old drywall. What terrified me most wasn't that it existed. It was what they found inside. A pile of belongings had been carefully tucked behind the insulation. An old sleeping bag, food wrappers, empty water bottles, a flashlight, and a small notebook. When one of the officers flipped through it, I caught a glimpse of the handwriting inside. My stomach turned. It was neat, deliberate, and full of notes about my house. Dates, times, and comments like lights out at 10:32 and child home from school early. It was a record of our lives. My legs nearly gave out. I couldn't breathe. That wasn't some random squatter or thief. Whoever had been in my home had been watching us, studying us, waiting. The officer looked at me seriously. Ma'am, this person's been here for a while, maybe months. That word, months, echoed in my head. I thought of the nights I woke up to soft creaks in the hallway, the toys that were slightly moved, the food that went missing from the fridge, all the things I'd brushed off as forgetfulness. They bagged the evidence and said they'd run fingerprints, but I couldn't stay there another night. I packed a few clothes, Lila's favorite stuffed bear, and drove straight to my sister's house. I didn't sleep. My sister tried to reassure me, saying the police would handle it, but I couldn't shake the image of that dark figure standing behind my daughter. I kept seeing it whenever I closed my eyes. The next morning, the detective called. Ms. Clark, we found something else. My pulse quickened. What? The man. We think we know who he is. He explained that the fingerprints matched a man named Daniel Carter, a former contractor who had worked on my house years before I bought it. He'd been reported missing by his family 6 months ago. They said he had mental health issues and often believed people were watching him. He used to work on home remodels, sometimes sleeping in attics or crawl spaces of unfinished houses. I listened, numb. So he just stayed here? For months? It looks that way, the detective said. He might have been using the crawl spaces and the basement tunnel to move between walls. He knew how to stay hidden. I felt sick. All this time, my home, The one place where I felt safe with my daughter hadn't been mine at all. It had been shared with a stranger. Later that day, the police asked me to come back to identify the items found in the basement. I didn't want to, but I had to know. The house looked different now. Every door open, every light on, a crime scene in the daylight. When I stepped inside, an officer led me down to the basement. The smell of damp concrete and dust filled the air. The plywood panel I had ripped off now lay on the floor beside me. Inside the hidden space, I saw more than I expected. A stack of photographs, hundreds of them, of me and Lila. Some were taken from inside the house. One showed Lila coloring at the kitchen table while I washed dishes in the background. Another showed me sitting on the couch, reading. I felt my throat tighten. These weren't stolen photos. They were taken through the cracks in the walls, from inside. The detective spoke softly. We think he set up a small camera system using the electrical wiring down here. He probably had access to your power box. The feed might have been running through his phone. It felt like the ground vanished beneath me. So when Megan saw him, he wasn't breaking in. He was already here. The detective nodded. He must have made a mistake that night. Came out too early, thinking you weren't home. That realization broke something inside me. He'd been there every night, close enough to hear us talk, laugh, sleep. Every time I sang Lila to bed, he might have been just a few feet away behind a wall, listening. I thought that was the end of it. But later that evening, as I was packing up to stay permanently with my sister, I got another call from the police. They'd found Daniel Carter. He'd been discovered in an abandoned house only a few blocks away. When the officers entered, he was muttering to himself, repeating the same phrase over and over. She moved the camera. She moved the camera. He was taken into custody without resistance. The detective told me they'd found his phone. On it were dozens of photos and videos, taken through the vents and cracks of my walls. One of them, recorded the night Megan saw him, showed Lila playing on the floor and me's voice faintly calling from downstairs. Behind her, the man's shadow moves, then suddenly jerks back when the baby monitor light turns red. That was when he realized he'd been caught. I cried for hours after the police left, partly from fear, but mostly from relief. Relief that it was over, that my daughter was safe, that the monster who had invaded our lives was finally gone. When I went to pick Lila up from my sister's, she ran to me with her usual bright smile, holding her stuffed bear tight. She asked, "Mommy, can we go home now?" I knelt down, hugged her close, and said, "Not this home, sweetheart. We're getting a new one." That night, I locked the door of my sister's guest room and sat awake for hours, listening to every sound. I wanted to believe it was just the house settling, the pipes, the wind, but part of me couldn't. Because when I checked my phone before bed, I noticed a new notification from the baby monitor app, the one I disconnected days ago. It read, "Motion detected, hallway." I deleted the app immediately. I didn't want to see what it showed, but deep down, I knew the truth. Some things don't leave with the person who caused them. Sometimes fear stays behind, living quietly in the walls of your mind. Weeks passed before I could step foot back inside that house. Even then, it didn't feel like mine anymore. Every wall felt hollow. Every floorboard whispered. The air itself seemed to carry a memory of what had happened. I kept thinking about how close we had come to disaster, how easily it could have gone differently if Megan hadn't sent that text, if I hadn't looked at the camera feed in time. I packed the last of our belongings in silence, determined to close this chapter for good. The police called a few times with updates. They said Daniel Carter was being held at a psychiatric facility. He barely spoke, except to ask if the little girl was okay. I didn't answer the call after that. I didn't want to hear his name again. I didn't want to imagine the places he hid, the nights he watched us from the walls. All I wanted was distance, from the fear, from the house, from the thought that someone had been living so close to us without us ever knowing. We moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't perfect. The walls were thin. The neighbors were loud. But it was ours. Every night before bed, I checked every lock, window, and closet. I double-checked the baby monitor, the new one I bought just for peace of mind. It wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was about control. I had lost it once. I wasn't going to lose it again. Lila adjusted faster than I expected. She was resilient, the way kids often are when they have someone to hold on to. But every so often, I'd catch her looking toward dark corners or asking quiet questions like, "Mommy, is the man gone now?" Each time I'd smile and tell her yes. But the truth was, I wasn't completely sure. Not because he was still out there, but because the fear he brought had left something behind, something invisible that followed me everywhere. I started therapy a few weeks later. The counselor told me trauma lives in layers. It doesn't vanish. It dulls over time. She said I might never look at a dark hallway the same way again, but that didn't mean I couldn't reclaim what it represented. Safety, home, peace. So little by little, I started to rebuild those things. I let light back in. I hung pictures on the walls again. I cooked in silence without glancing over my shoulder every 5 minutes. But even as life began to feel normal, small things kept reminding me of what we had survived. One afternoon, when I was folding laundry, Lila came running to me with a drawing she'd made at preschool. It was of a house, ours, but beside it, she'd drawn a dark shape standing near the window. When I asked who it was, she shrugged. "He was there before we left," she said simply, as if it were just a memory, not a nightmare. That night, I sat by her bed after she fell asleep and stared at the baby monitor screen. She looked peaceful, curled up with her stuffed bear. The feed flickered faintly, just static from bad reception. I told myself it was normal. Still, I kept the light on until morning. The next day, I went back to the old house one last time to meet the realtor. I wanted closure, to see it empty, stripped of everything that had made it ours. Walking through the front door, the smell of paint and dust hit me. The walls were bare, the furniture gone. It should have felt comforting, but it didn't. It felt like standing in the skeleton of a memory. I went upstairs to Lila's old room. The pastel wallpaper was half peeled, and sunlight poured through the window in streaks. For a second, it almost looked peaceful again. I closed my eyes and imagined her laughter filling the space like it used to. Then I noticed something faint carved into the wall near the closet. So small I almost missed it. It was a name, Lila, etched carefully into the drywall, like someone had written it with the edge of a coin. My knees went weak. I called the officer handling our case, and he told me it was possible the intruder had done it, maybe during one of the times he was hiding there. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know when. I just left. That night, as I lay in our new apartment, I realized something that finally brought me peace. The fear would never disappear completely, but neither would my strength. That man had invaded my home, but he didn't destroy us. We were still here. We were still living, breathing, healing. He'd taken my sense of safety, but he couldn't take my love for my daughter or the will to protect her. That was mine, and always would be. Now, every time I check the locks before bed, I don't do it out of panic. I do it out of gratitude. Gratitude that I still can. Gratitude that my daughter sleeps safely behind her door. And if I ever hear a noise in the dark again, I'll listen, but I won't be afraid, because I've learned something that nightmarish experience couldn't erase. Monsters don't always live under your bed. Sometimes they live behind your walls. But when you face them, when you refuse to let them win, they lose the power to haunt you. I tell this story not to scare you, but to remind you, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The world isn't always kind, but courage can be. And sometimes, it's the only thing that saves you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it made you think twice about what safe really means, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more real stories that matter, and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know you made it to the end with me.